Record. Go. Okay. So, good evening again, now that the recording is on. Last Tuesday night, we kind of went on a whole overview of Rosh Hashanah. It is recorded. It is on our website. And we went through the whats and the whys and the whens and the hows of the various different observances and customs and laws associated with Rosh Hashanah. And there's obviously lots of symbolism that we spoke about, and the various simanim, those things that we eat or say or do, putting us in the mindset of sweetness, of goodness, of kindness, and so on, compassion, all the themes of Rosh Hashanah. And we covered everything besides a very large part of Rosh Hashanah, and that is tefillah, and that is prayer. So as we mentioned last week, we celebrate a very different New Year's to perhaps other cultures, or perhaps even our own culture. As Aussies, we celebrate New Year, and as Jews, we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, and it's very, very different, and it's good to be able to celebrate both. But this New Year is not one about fireworks and partying through the night. It's very much about focusing on life and the important parts of life and eating. So the eating part we covered last week, and this evening we will kind of go through some of the tefillot, some of the prayers. We'll go through the mahzor, so whether you have your mahzor or not, that's fine. I'll kind of go through the main ones, and we'll work our way through some of the important ones. I mean, all prayers are important, but if we're going to choose which ones should we say, why do we say them, perhaps some of the backgrounds, and so on. So I just mentioned, by way of passing, that the book, the sefer that we use for Rosh Hashanah, is not called a siddur, like we usually call it during the year. It's called a mahzor. Mahzor literally means, well, one of the translations is to repeat, to go through. It's a new year, it's changing, and we go through the mahzor, so almost like a repetition of the prayers. It means the same thing as a siddur, and as we all know, there are various different types of mahzarim. In Elwood, we used to announce 4 mahzarim every time we turned the page. It got a bit cumbersome, and I think we've narrowed it down to 3 now, which is better than 4. Obviously there's the art scroll, which I have here in front of me, perhaps the most popular and modern of them all, at least in the traditional sense of the word, the mahzarim. There's the good old Birnbaum, which is a reddish, purplish kind of book, and within the Birnbaum there's 2. There's the large Birnbaum, which has Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in one edition, and the skinny Birnbaum, which has the Rosh Hashanah separate to the Yom Kippur. And then there's the, I think by now we can call it ancient, although people still use it today, the Adler. I think that's a black mahzor. David's got it, yes. It is ancient, it does the job, it's got all the words in it. The English is probably quite difficult for us to understand in 2020, but it's there and it works. And especially if you're used to it, people like holding on to a tradition, especially this time of the year. It definitely works. So as long as you've got a mahzor, it doesn't make a difference what type of mahzor it is. It's to channel or to help stay focused on the prayers. Having said that, and I think this point is perhaps emphasized this year. Every single year in Shule, I make the same announcement. I make a few of the same announcements, but this one, I say that no matter what page you're on the right page. Meaning, yes, the Shul service needs to have a start time and an end time, and we need to cover ground, and we need to say certain things at certain times, and we need to move, but that shouldn't stop somebody from staying on a page, or going back to a page, or focusing on one specific prayer, because it's not about covering ground. It's not about getting from point A to point B. That's not what tefillah, that's not what prayer is all about, especially on Rosh Hashanah. It's about connecting. It's about having that conversation with God. It's about finding a relevant prayer, something that speaks to me, something that I can relate to, or ask myself if I can relate to it. And this year, why I say this year, it will be emphasized more than ever, because sadly we won't be in Shul, and there'll be nobody turning the pages, and there'll be nobody telling us which page to be on. And if there is any sort of silver lining to this, which we always look for silver linings, if we're going to be in a situation, then we've got to find the good out of it. is that we can actually spend time on any page we want without being pushed along or being told to move or somebody else being on a different page and confusing me. We can actually go through the pages, find what works, and make it relevant and make it meaningful. And I think that can be so very, very special. And I actually look forward doing that. As much as I'll miss being with the people and being in my favorite shul, I will, if this is the situation I'm in, I'll be able to actually say the words, not announce page numbers, and be able to focus and find meaning in the words. So that's just a bit of a preamble about tefillah. So it's that conversation. Yes, it's called prayer. It's a conversation between us and our Creator. And that conversation can come in many different ways. So again, in the mahzor, there are prescribed prayers, the things that we say. But that's not to say that you can't make up your own prayer. And it doesn't have to be in Hebrew, and it doesn't have to be in Yiddish, and it doesn't have to be in English. It can be in any language that you speak, that's relevant to you. It doesn't make a difference what language God speaks. It's about you expressing feeling, thought, prayer, wishes, frustration. That's prayer, to be able to connect. So there can be a balance between what's in the book and what's not in the book. And 100% that is considered prayer. In fact, just thinking of it now as I'm talking, this one of the stories that we read about on Rosh Hashanah in the Haftarah is the story of Hannah, where she was mumbling in the temple. She was accused of being a drunk. It's many different lessons to learn from that story, and we've covered it some of them over the years. But she was praying, and she wasn't doing any prescribed prayer. She was literally praying from her heart, pouring out her heart to her Creator to be blessed with a son, which she was granted, a child who was a son. So prayer literally needs to come from the heart. You need to be able to relate to it. So if that means not doing all the prayers in the book on Rosh Hashanah, that's absolutely fine. So long as there was one thing or two things or three things or four things that perhaps were meaningful and you found relatable. I'm not sitting here saying don't pray the whole thing, but I wouldn't be pressured to do the whole thing. I wouldn't be pressured to do the whole thing. I would try and find things that speak to me, and perhaps looking at the mahzor differently than you would in shul. So, which takes us to tefillah. Once again, my eyes will be darting all over the place because I've got a mahzor and I've got some notes, and I've got the trusted Elwood service guide that we usually have on our seats, sometimes that has little pointers in there. It's actually a really good resource because it's got all the page numbers and the prayers in there. I've actually uploaded this document for the very first time online on our website, which you can print out before Yom Tov, if you wish to do so. It's on elwoodshul.org/HH, which is for high holidays, and it's there for Rosh Hashanah, and It's there for Rosh Hashanah, and it's there for Yom Kippur. So, there you can still see, we've still got, I don't know if you can see, but 4 of the mahzorim, the Adler, the Art Scroll, the Birnbaum, and the Birnbaum. I think at one point there was the Chabad in there as well, but there's not many left, besides maybe for our Gabba. Okay, which takes us to tefillah. So obviously the first tefillah, the first prayer of Rosh Hashanah is the evening service. As we do every night, we daven Mariv. It's pretty traditional. When I say traditional, it's pretty regular. Just having a look through the mahzor now. The Amidah, the standing part of it, perhaps is a little bit longer. It starts including some of the Rosh Hashanah prayers. And if you happen to have an art scroll in front of you, it's on 62. And the first prayer that sticks out, and this is a very familiar song, it's a key theme of Rosh Hashanah. And we say this prayer for 10 days, starting from Rosh Hashanah all the way through to Yom Kippur. We say it in our Amidah every single day for 10 days. And that is Zachreinu L'chaim. It's on page 62 if you happen to be looking in a mahzor, at the art scroll, I should say. You know, and I'm not going to announce all the pages all the time, but in the mahzor, you know, maybe I will. Are there any thumbs up if you have anyone with a Birnbaum tonight? Okay, so I'll do it quickly. We'll do it smoothly. So, yeah, in the Birnbaum, it would be on 31. that's the beginning of the Amidah. So before you sit down to the meal, before you make Kiddush, before you have your apple and honey, before you have your round challah, we would say the Amidah. We would say Shema before, but we would do the Amidah. And then you have that prayer, Zachreinu L'chaim, Melech Hafetz B'chaim, very tunes. And it's the key theme of Rosh Hashanah. What does it mean in English? Remember us for life. So this whole idea of memory, remembrance, remembering is very much a big, big theme of Rosh Hashanah. So we're asking Hashem to shed positive memories on our lives and remember us for life, for good, for a healthy life, for a sweet life, but also for a meaningful life. And it mentions V'chatzveinu b'sefer HaChaim and so on. The rest of that Amidah is, it's not very long. It touches on a few, it's got some Yom Tov elements because it is a regular Yom Tov, but it also has some Rosh Hashanah elements as well. And it's not a long service at all. In fact, it's very short. Shorter than a Friday night service, I would say. And then at the end of the Amidah, we actually say a psalm, which we don't do during the year. We say other psalms, but we don't necessarily do this one. It's Psalm 24. I think in the Birnbaum it's on 39, in the Art Scroll it's 78. And it's a very interesting psalm, but it encapsulates Rosh Hashanah. And it kind of reminds us that God is master over the world. If that's one of the big main themes of Rosh Hashanah, that we acknowledge the sovereignty of Hashem, and we recoronate God as our king, and we acknowledge that he runs the world, not only created it way back when, but actually is involved in the running of the day-to-day matters of the world, so to speak. I mentioned today, God runs the world. And Harry responded, yeah, the whole world besides Victoria. Dan Andrews runs Victoria. Yeah, but God runs the world. That's a big part of Rosh Hashanah, acknowledging that we are God's creations. So in this Psalm 24, we kind of highlight the fact, Ein melech b'lo am. There is no king, there's no queen without a nation, right? I can decide to call myself a king or some great person, but if I don't have a following, then my position is worthless. It's meaningless. So we acknowledge that we are the people and God is the master. So God is our king. So we talk about the greatness of the heavens and so on. So on that first night of Rosh Hashanah, we say Psalm 24. There's a very interesting prayer after that. And if you, in the Art Scroll says, some add silently the following Kabbalistic prayer, which goes into a whole Kabbalistic meaning of Rosh Hashanah. But more so, this Psalm 24, and I think it says it in the Art Scroll as well, it says it's a prayer for sustenance as well. To say this prayer followed by the other one. So it's really, you get into it and it's a prayer for Parnasa. So that's the night prayer. It is a little bit different because it's Friday night this year, the first night, but generally speaking, it's not a very long one. And it goes straight into, you go home, well, we'll be home this year, but Kiddush, you enjoy your meal. And as we said last week, the first thing we're supposed to do in an official capacity before making Kiddush is wishing each other a Lashana Tova. In a specific words, it says it in your machzor. If you look at the end of Mariv, right before Shalom Aleichem, it says, Lashana Tova tekatev v'techatem, which means it should be a good year, and you should be inscribed and sealed for a good year. To a woman, you would say the same thing, but just in the feminine term, Lashana Tova tekatevi v'techatemi. So we officially wish each other a good year, a zis year, a sweet year, and so on. Okay. And then we eat, then we bench, and we wake up the next morning and we daven shacharit. Shacharit is pretty standard, at least the beginning part of shacharit. It's very much the same as Shabbos. There's not much difference. Where it does start taking a Rosh Hashanah theme is right before Baruch Hu. So in the Art Scroll, it's on page 262. In the Birnbaum, it's 169. And you'll notice in big words, the word Hamelech. Hamelech literally means the king. Now, this is not a specific prayer to Rosh Hashanah. In fact, it is said every single Shabbos in Shul, but it is emphasized on Rosh Hashanah. And we actually put a full stop in a place where we don't usually put a full stop, and that is right before the word HaMelech. So on the page before, usually we don't stop there. Usually we go straight into the next paragraph. But on Rosh Hashanah, we stop by this word HaMelech, and whoever is going to daven, whoever is going to lead the services for Shacharit will start here. And tradition has it, not so much in our shul, but you'll find it in other shuls. In fact, I remember hearing a story from Rabbi Gutnick that it did used to happen in our shul. Very funny story, I'll get to it in a second. The Chazan begins a whole introductory melody, a wordless melody, that reaches a crescendo with HaMelech, the king, and thus starts the Rosh Hashanah theme of davening. I don't remember all the details of the story, Mark probably does, but there was a bit of a confusion, there was a bit of a mix-up of who was going to lead the services in Elwood for Shacharit that morning. I think both people were convinced that they were going to do it. I think both had a feeling that the other one was going to get up, and both started singing the same tune from opposite sides of the shul, and they both approached the bimah at the same time for HaMelech. So I hope they came to some sort of resolution, but I don't know. HaMelech, the king. And if I remember, there's actually another story about HaMelech, which is quite interesting, but not for now. So that's where it all starts. So that's on page 262, the main prayers. We then, right after the next page, we say Psalm 130, which we do for those 10 days as well, Rosh Hashanah through to Yom Kippur. We open the Ark and we say Tehillim 130. So if you're going to look to say a psalm on Rosh Hashanah, this is a good psalm to say. It's about forgiveness, it's about compassion, it's about calling God from the depths, meaning an honest and genuine prayer. It's said generally with the Ark open to show the importance and significance of that prayer. It doesn't have to be said with the Ark open. And generally, it's actually said verse by verse after the Chazan, after the cantor. And then, a few pages later, well, you'll notice in the art scroll, many times in the mahzor, it will say, many congregations omit the following and continue on page such and such. I don't know about, some shuls may say them all, but in Elwood, whenever it says many congregations skip the next few pages, we skip the next few pages. So we don't say the pages that it says many congregations skip. Otherwise, we'll be there till 4. There's some lovely prayers there. They're called piyutim, which are, piyutim actually sounds like the English version of poetic. They are literally poetic prayers written across, sometimes, you know, in acronym or in catchy words, in a poetic sort of way. We usually go through them. So we skip about 5 or 6 pages. It's not as if we skip, you know, main prayers, but these are bonus prayers, which, I don't know, if you have enough time and you're looking for more prayers to say, go right ahead. There are some extra prayers here that we say because it's Shabbos. So you'll see below the line, it says on the Sabbath, say such and such. Those are traditional Shabbos prayers, which takes us all the way to Shema Yisrael. It's not a specific Rosh Hashanah prayer, but it's one heck of a prayer to say on Shema Yisrael, to say on Rosh Hashanah, because it's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. It's that moment. It's really the significance of Rosh Hashanah. It's the most profound statement. It's the most forceful statement that we say as Jews. It's the credo of our faith, and our belief in God, that we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. In fact, that's the prayer that we end Yom Kippur with right before we give that final blast. So while it's not a specific prayer to Rosh Hashanah, if we're going to say a meaningful prayer and think about the words and meditate on it and cover our eyes, Shema Yisrael is a beautiful prayer, and it always has been. I mean, you read all the stories from the war and so on. Shema Yisrael was used as an identification almost to see if it resonated with the soul when they would walk into these, what do they call them? You know, these displaced people, the displaced camps where they used to send kids or whatever, and they never used to know which ones were the Jewish kids, and they used to get mixed up and so on. They used to yell out Shema Yisrael and see who it would resonate with. There's many stories like that. From the Shema, it goes into the Amidah. So the Amidah, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, it's on page 296 in the art scroll, 201 or 195, depending what Birnbaum you're in. Again, it's not very long at all. It includes Zachreinu L'chaim, that typical song that we say, Mi chamocha av harachaman, another line that we say. It's very short. Now, if we were in Shule, we would then go to the repetition of the Amidah, which is slightly longer. But because we won't be in Shule, this prayer actually won't be said, because there's no repetition of the Amidah. So songs like, there's heaps. I'm just turning over 10, 15 pages here. But songs like, well, in Elwood, there's not many people in the room yet at this point in time. We're not up to, usually the chaos begins about Torah reading time. That's when the floodgates open. So this is still before Torah reading. It's quite a serene time in Shule, actually, and we're wondering, oh my goodness, did they forget about Shule this year? That's usually the point of when we're saying, will they come? Will they come? And yes, they will come. They always do. So there's quite a bit there, but none really of note, I would say. So after this, I would say we would go to the end of Shacharit, right before the reading of the Torah, to a very famous prayer, one we should definitely all say on Rosh Hashanah, and that is the Avino Marcano. Okay, sometimes we think there's only one or two, the first one that we sing and the last one that we sing, but there's quite a few there. It's 2 pages or maybe even 3 pages worth of Avino Marcano. Avino Marcano is an ancient prayer. In fact, I was reading today, the origin of the prayer is quoted in the Talmud, and they were instituted and composed by Rabbi Akiva, the great sage. He formulated the Avino Marcanos. Now, I'll tell you something interesting about Avino Marcano in a moment. If you're looking for the page, the Avino Marcanos, I've skipped quite a bit here, but page 384 in the art scroll and 271 or 243 in the Birnbaum. So Avino Marcano, again, if there's going to be a prayer that you say on Rosh Hashanah, absolutely the Avino Marcanos, and there's lots to relate to. It even talks about, save us from pandemics and things like that. So in a regular year, when we say, what pandemic? This year, we actually know what that means, sadly. And negative decrees and so on. But there's some beautiful prayers there, and we can pause in them. It talks about good health and parnasa and good life, and you can actually pause for a minute. Nobody's rushing over here to think about the various Avino Marcanos. So it's quite powerful. I'll read you something. This is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, from his mahzor. He has a mahzor called the Koren mahzor, which I think is perhaps even more modern than the art scroll, as far as perhaps more explanations and so on. I've seen snippets of it. It's quite beautiful. He brings out a beautiful point. What do the words Avino Marcano mean? We're turning to God and say, look at us. We're looking at you like Avinu, our father, a parent, and Marcano, our king. A parent and a king are very, very different ways of relating to a parent-child relationship, to a sovereign and subject relationship. And yet we turn to God and we relate to God as both, as the compassion and the understanding of a parent-child relationship, and the seriousness and the significance, and on a judgment level, so to speak, a reverence level, as a sovereign, as a king, and a subject. And we're able to put both of them together. So Rabbi Sachs writes, and I quote, "It was the genius of Rabbi Akiva to juxtapose 2 ideas. God is our king and we are his subjects, yet God is also our father and we are his children. And with utter simplicity pray that God see us with the love of a parent before considering our lives with a detachment of a king." So we're basically saying in 2 words, we know, God, that our life is before you. And we know that we're being looked at today, so to speak. We're being judged, for who we are, for our situation, for our circumstances. And I'm not saying this in a fearful way, but our lives are being looked at. But preface that, we turn to God, as with the loving kindness and compassion and forgiveness and patience, like a parent will turn towards a child. So Avino Marcano, they go both together, even though they are so different. And then he continues, which I find fascinating. He says, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, Niels Bohr, he came up with this principle, and I'll quote, that you cannot chart simultaneously the position and the velocity of a particle. You can't look at the position and the velocity of a particle at the same time. You've either got to focus on the position or on the velocity. So this physicist said that this idea, this principle, came to him when his son confessed to having stolen an item from a local shop. So this Niels Bohr said he found that he could think of him with love as a father and with justice as a judge, but not both at the same time. I can be loving like a father. I can meter out justice like a judge, but I can't do both at the same time. God can be both at the same time, Avinu and Malkeinu. Something to think about, something to meditate about on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, that's Avinu Marcano. Generally, we usually, in Elwood at least, we sing the second one. We sing Avinu Marcano, Ein lanu melech, ela ata. That one, and the end one, a couple of pages later, Avinu, the classic, Avinu Marcano, Chanenu Vanenu. In between, you have the other ones. But the very first one, have a look at it, or if you don't have a machzor, I'll tell you. Avinu Marcano, Chatanu lefanecha. The first one we say, our Father, our King, we have sinned before you. Way to open the conversation. We have sinned before you. But I'm not focusing on the content. I'm actually focusing on the fact that it says, we sinned before you. Who sinned? And this takes on another level when it comes to Yom Kippur. You know, when we do all those, the al-chet, we tap on our chest countless times to acknowledge the seat of our feelings and emotions. And we say, for this sin, for that sin, and we go through every imaginable thing that we can ever possibly do wrong. And we say them even if we're never transgressed on that particular sin. And here we are that we say, we have sinned. And it reminds us, and there's a few of these reminders, that we're kind of all in this together. At least as a people, as Am Yisrael, it's like that famous story of a passenger on the boat who found another passenger drilling a hole under his seat. And he says, what in the world are you doing? And the guy says, what's your business? This is my seat. I'm allowed to make a hole under my seat. Right? You're an idiot, because if you're going to sink the boat and we're all going down with you. It's the same thing. When we do the right thing, then we all do the right thing. When one of us mess up, it kind of has an effect on all of us. So we're kind of limbs of the same body. And therefore we say, Chatanu lefanecha. We as a people, even if we shoulder somebody else's issues as well, as if we don't have our own, we're kind of carrying somebody else's, acknowledging the fact that we are one. It's a minor idea. Rosh Hashanah, as I said last week, is a very personal Yom Tov. It's about us. It's about our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with God. But this idea that we're all one and the consequences of our actions really matter is something that comes out here. Chatanu lefanecha. Fast forward to the very last Avino Marcano. It's quite fascinating. It's a beautiful song, the one I sang before. Avino Marcano, Chanenu Vanenu. What does it mean? Our Father, our King. Chanenu Vanenu means be gracious to us and answer us, our prayers. And then it says, Ki ein banu masim. What does that mean? Though we have no worthy deeds, we've got nothing to offer you, God, but be kind to us anyway. Right? We're asking for a mitzvah. We're asking for a deal. We've got nothing. We're very few in deeds, but we're asking for you to be compassionate. So I came across an interesting parable about this. It says this retail merchant who dealt in fabrics made his way to his wholesale supplier to buy the goods he needs for his business. And the wholesaler instructed his workers to look after the merchant, give him what he needs, bring him everything that he wants. So he stands in the middle of the warehouse. And this guy starts screaming, I want 1,000 yards of this cloth and 2,000 yards of blue velvet and 3,000 yards of white silk. And he shouts and he shouts and he orders and he orders, and he's got, you know, trolleys full of material, of schoira, of shmatas. And it's time to pay. he goes, you know, to tally up what it needs to be done, what needs to be paid. And he goes to the owner, the wholesaler, and he whispers in his ear, listen, I can't give you any money for this right now. Give me some credit and I'll pay you later. It's almost the same thing what we do on Rosh Hashanah. We stand there for 3 hours, and we close our eyes, and God, I really need this year, and I really need that this year, and I need health, and I need safety, and I need money, and I need everything that we wish for, and we can wish for and hope for everything. I want this, and I want that, and I want this, and I want that. And then the last Avino Marcano, we whisper, I got nothing to give you for it. You know, put it on credit. Put it on credit. And yet, that's the way it is. We have the right almost to demand things. And when I say things, we should obviously demand things that are worth demanding, not, we shouldn't waste. I'm not saying nobody can tell you what's important and what's not important. You know, we say, what do we pray for? We pray for that God should help us ask for the right things, right? He knows best what we need. But sometimes we know what we need and we need it badly. So we should never be scared, embarrassed to open up and say, you know, I really need it to live a good life and to live a meaningful life and a peaceful life. But at the same time, sometimes we say, no, I only have a few pennies to pay. I guess part of that is trying to say, okay, well, this is what I can give to you this year. This is what I am giving to the cause. This is what I am giving to my people. But it's quite amazing how in this last Avino Marcano, we're asking for kindness and graciousness, even though we don't have too many worthy deeds to pay up with. Quite amazing. Okay, which takes us to opening the ark, and we sing the famous 13 attributes of mercy. Hashem, Hashem, Rachum v'chanun erech. We sing it 3 times, followed by Va'ani tefilasi. We do that. We take out the Torah and we read from it. So 2 different readings for 2 different days. The first day we read about the birth of Yitzchak. Sarah gives birth to Yitzchak, to Isaac. And we also understand that Rivka and Rachel were also blessed with children on Rosh Hashanah. So these 3 of our matriarchs, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel, all had to pray hard and wait for a very long time for children. And we recall this story because it's kind of what we're trying to ask Hashem to remember us. With some, you know, we're waiting for blessings, we're waiting for good. And God remembered them on this day. And therefore it fits, once again, fits into the theme of Yom HaZikaron, Zachrenu, that God remembers us for life and gives us what we need, what we want, what we know that we need. So that fits into the theme of the day, the birth of Yitzchak, and it also highlights the idea of prayer, because all those 3 great women turned to God in prayer. Not just those 3 women, but in this context, these 3 women literally poured their hearts out and souls out to their Creator, asking for blessing for children. So it definitely fits into the theme of Rosh Hashanah. The next day, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, is the famous story of the binding of, again, we go back to Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, that story of the Akedah, which got layers and layers and layers of, you know, of insight and explanation and what you can learn from it and so on. But bottom line is, here you had people who would sacrifice anything for a cause that they believed in. Thankfully, none of us ever have to cross such a test. But it's that thought that what would we be willing to give up for our faith, for our people, and so on. It's a daunting thought. But it also teaches us the idea of commitment and what would we give to the cause. So that's the second day of Rosh Hashanah, which takes us to the Haftarahs. The Haftarahs are quite interesting. I mentioned one before about the story of Shmuel. Again, Hannah, a mother awaiting a child, very much begging Hashem for blessing, being heard and being answered, which is exactly what we are focusing on Rosh Hashanah. Second day, very similar. A lot of the mahzarim as well at the bottom have different explanations that you can read as to why we read those specific things. So we put the Sefer Torah, no, we don't. We keep the Sefer Torah out, And at this point, we usually blow the shofar. This year, the first day is on Shabbat. We don't blow the shofar anyway. On Shabbos, the second day, Sunday, we would blow the shofar. And obviously, this is a very sad situation where we can't be in shul or listen to the shofar. But I think there will be some good news that there will be a way that we will be able to hear the shofar as far as being some plan to get people out into various different streets in a legal manner. Which actually it's a recent development that took place today, and I think they're just waiting to get it all in writing before anything is advertised or said. But if it does go ahead, there'll be this massive map of local areas here that will be split up, and there will be different shofar blowers in different places. There'll be forms to fill out if you want somebody to actually come outside your house. You can't go out, they can't come in, but there'll be a lot of things going on the street in an absolute legal manner. But this is where we blow the shofar. How many sounds do we hear? As we said last week, we hear 30 sounds during this period of time. This is usually in Elwood when there's hundreds of kids around the bimah, and we sound 30 sounds. It's a very, very auspicious moment. It always gives me the shivers in a major way. It's almost an out-of-body experience for me when it comes to that shofar time. It's very, very, well, not out-of-body experience, but it's a very, very surreal moment. I definitely feel something going on then. And we say a couple of verses, and all those things, or generally I would say a few words before blowing the shofar, share words from the pulpit, and kind of just to focus our minds on what's going on. One of the words that we say is min ha-meitzar karasiyah, from the depths, actually not from the depths, from the narrow straits, from the narrowness of my situation I'm calling out. And we want God to answer us in a broad way. It's a psalm from King David. Min ha-meitzar karasiyah, I will call out from a narrow place. Anani v'merchav, answer me from a broad place, which is quite self-understood. I'm calling out from a frustrated place, or a place of hurt, or a place of pain, from a narrow place, and I want the answer to come in a wide place. But it's also symbolic of the shape of the shofar. The shape of the shofar is narrow, starts off narrow, and the voice comes out wide at the end, the actual shape of the shofar, which is, again, symbolic of the day. And that's shofar. So whether you hear shofar at this particular point of your prayer or not, it doesn't matter. So long as at least 30 sounds are heard on Rosh Hashanah, you have fulfilled your obligation. In Shule, we would hear many more. We actually hear 100. If you stay till, what time do we finish, Mark? Is it 12:40 or 1:40? 1 o'clock? Yeah. You would hear 100 sounds. And this is the breakdown. 30 at the time that I'm talking about now. Then you would hear another 30 during the quiet Amidah. We pause 3 times and we blow 10. And then while the chazan, the cantor, repeats the Amidah, another 30. So that's 90. And then 10 during the final Kaddish, where we sing that one, and we blow the final 10. So you actually end up hearing 100. Some people even tack on an extra at the end, extra few at the end. But to fulfill the obligation of listening to shofar and Rosh Hashanah, 30 sounds, which takes just a few minutes. Which takes us to Musaf, and I'm going to go through this now. So there are 2 main things to remember in Musaf. If we're going to pick, Musaf is quite long. It's the bulk of the service. And if you're going to pick anything, I would say this is probably the main one. It's a heavy, heavy prayer. You probably know which one I'm talking about. It's the one that goes into the song of Rosh Hashanah Yikadeh V'Yamtza. That one. On Rosh Hashanah we are inscribed, and on Yom Kippur we are sealed. It is on page where are we? Here. It's on page 480 in the art scroll, and in the Birnbaum, depending on which one you have, it's either 361 or 325. Let me just turn to it. And it's called Unetane Tokef. It is a, one second. It is a very significant prayer. What page did I say it was on? Yeah. Let me just turn to it quickly. It's definitely a prayer that's a bit spine tingling, especially if it's sung beautifully, but the words themselves are quite significant. And I'll read you again from Dr. Jonathan Sachs. He says it in a very beautiful way. He actually calls it the four movements, which is obviously a musical term, but the four movements of Unatane Tokef. And he splits it up like this: the scene, the stakes, the Jewish outburst of faith, and then the fragility of life. And I'll quote: "No prayer more powerfully defines the image of the days of awe than the Unatane Tokef. The language is simple, the imagery is strong, the rhythm insistent, and the drama intense." It's quite a beautiful way of summing up that prayer. And it's structured in four movements. The first sets the scene. And obviously this is a very physical scene, the way we as humans can imagine. I don't think I have to sit here telling you that there's no table up there with a book open, but it's the way we imagine a judgment taking place, a court scene, so to speak. And obviously it's happening on a very spiritual dimension, but for our finite way of thinking, the way our understanding works, this is how it would be if it was in the physical world. And he says, the first sets the scene. The heavenly court is assembled. God sits in the seat of judgment. The angels are trembling. And before God is the book of all our deeds. In it, our lives are written, bearing our signature, and we await the verdict. That's the opening lines of Unatane Tokef, a very serious scene. The second highlights what is at stake. Haunting words. Mi yichye mi yamut. Who will live and who will die? Who will flourish, who will suffer? Who will be at ease? Who will be tormented? Right? What's at stake? Between now and Yom Kippur, we're literally thinking about life and how our life will be, the stake. Sorry, not the stake. What's at stake? Thinking about the, the balance of life, literally. Then, he writes, comes the great outburst of faith that defines Judaism as a religion of hope. So after we said who will live and who will die, and there can be this decree in the world, we yell out on the top of our lungs, utshuva, utfila, utstaka, which we basically say that no fate is final in Judaism. We believe in the power of prayer. We believe in pardon. We believe in patience. We believe in forgiveness and so on. And if we were to connect with those three things, we'll get to them in a moment, teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah, then we have a hope that things will go well. So it's an outburst of faith. And finally, the fourth movement, a very moving reflection of human life and the eternity of God. And we say, we are no more than a fragment of pottery. There's a beautiful song about this on Kol Nidre Night. Ki hine kachomer. We are no more than a fragment of pottery, a blade of grass, a flower that fades, a shadow, a cloud, a breath of wind. Dust we are, and dust we return, but God is life forever. And by attaching ourselves to God, we may attach ourselves to affinity. So the fragility of life, we come, we go. We're only on the scene for a certain amount of time. And there's scenes before us, the scenes after us. And that is basically Unatane Tokef. It's quite a serious prayer, not a sad prayer, but a very confronting, genuine way of thinking about what's at stake, and that is life, and how we live life, and how meaningful life should be. And then Rabbi Sachs goes through those three things that we yell out very briefly: teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah. And we've discussed this quite a few times. Teshuvah does not only mean, I should say, repentance, but it means returning. That's the true word, to our roots, to our faith, to our people's history, to Sinai, to who we are inside. It's not about becoming somebody else. Teshuvah means connecting to us. Tefillah means prayer, conversation with God. How's our conversation with God going? Also to listen to the conversation. Sometimes we hear God speaking to us, our gut feeling, so it's not so much about asking for what we want, but more about, please teach us what we need, like I said before. And finally, tzedakah. Tzedakah is how we do good for others. So if you think about this for a moment, this sums up what we should be focusing on this time of the year. Teshuvah, ourself. Where am I as a human being, as a Jew? Tefillah, where is my relationship with God? How's my conversations going? And that will be different for every person. The conversations will be different. How the conversations will take place, where the conversations will take place. And lastly, tzedakah. What is my involvement with others? And then we move on from an Unetane Tokef. So there, again, after Avino Marcano, that's another beautiful, powerful prayer to dwell on. And then Musaf goes on. It's quite long. And I'm not going to go through it. I'm just going to tell you that it's broken up into 3 parts. And now you'll understand why. And after those parts, we actually blow the shofar 3 times. So 3 times. It's made up of 3 topics: Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot. And each one, there's 10 verses from the Torah. 10 verses on the Torah that talks about God's sovereignty. 10 verses from the Torah that talks about how God remembers us in a positive light. So it's not scary verses, oh my gosh, God's going to remember what I did wrong. It's actually quotes from the Torah that how God fondly remembered people for blessing. And lastly, 10 verses from the Torah that deal with the concept of a shofar. From the first blast of the shofar that took place at Mount Sinai to the future where we wait for Tekah b'shofar gadol lecherotenu, where there'll be the ultimate blast of the shofar that will bring peace and redemption to the world. And that's what makes Musaf so long. A part about sovereignty, a part about remembrance, and a part about the shofar. And that basically takes you to the end of Musaf, which is basically the end of the service. I'll just finish with one thing here in a moment, if I can find it. I should say, I didn't mention this really, but you can find this in your mahzor. That Unetane Tokef prayer, that haunting, confronting prayer, has a tremendous story behind it. And you can find it in your mahzor. It's about 1,000 years old. What was his name? Amnon of Mainz, where he was tortured horrifically by the Romans, I think it was. Horrific torture, 1 limb at a time. They literally took him apart. And on his dying breath, he asked to be taken to a Shule on Rosh Hashanah, and he uttered these words about the fragility of life, and ultimately it's the day of judgment and so on. And ever since then, we've been saying this Unetane Tokef. So it's a very old prayer with a very confronting story to it. But there was one more thing that I wanted to mention. Where was it? It was about that Hamelech. It was actually here it's a story. I'll just read it to you and I'll finish with this. It's quite amazing. Remember I said one of the first things that we say in the morning in Shachrit is Hamelech, the king, right? With that preamble of a song. So there's an interesting story here of a rabbi who lived in the mid to 1800s. His name is Rabbi Aaron Perlot. He was the Hasidic leader of Karlin. Karlin is a Hasidic group. They are known for the way they pray. They pray very, very loudly. If you walk through Mea Sha'arim and you happen to walk by a Karlin shtibel or a Karlin shul, you will be blown away. They daven really, really loudly. That's the tradition of their dynasty. Anyway, so this Rabbi Aaron Perlot would lead the prayers of Rosh Hashanah. I'm just going to read it to you so I stay focused. One year he was about to shout the opening words, Hamelech, Hamelech, the king, beginning the Shachrit Rosh Hashanah service. And he fainted. He fainted when he said Hamelech. And he was revived by whoever, I don't think they had Hatzalah there, but whoever was there, they revived him and continued the prayers. And following the service, his Hasidim asked him why he fainted. And Reb Aaron offered the following explanation. And he quoted a story from the Talmud that describes an incident that took place at the end of the Second Temple era of Jerusalem. Jerusalem at the time was under siege, and the living conditions were terrible. They were becoming increasingly intolerable. And the leader of the Jewish people at that time, famous Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, a famous sage, most prominent sage of Jerusalem at the time, he attempted to meet with Vespasian, the Roman general at the time, and entreat him, to beg him to spare the lives of the Jews. And in order to get past the Roman guards, he arranged to have himself transported out of the city in a casket, as if he was dead, because there was no way to leave the siege. So he faked death, went into a box, and they escorted him out of the city. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw Vespasian, he greeted him as follows. He said, "Peace upon you, Shalom Aleichem, King, peace upon you." He said, "Shalom Aleichem Melech, peace be upon you, King." Upon hearing this greeting, Vespasian responded angrily, "I shall kill you for 2 reasons. First, because you addressed me as king, and I'm not king, I'm the general. And secondly, if you truly believe that I am king, why have you not come until now why have you not come until now to plead your case before me? So Rabbi Aaron of Karlin turned around to his Hasidim. He said, that's exactly why I fainted. When I said the word Hamelech, proclaiming God as king of the universe, I was reminded of this story. And I said, hey, when was the last time I turned to God and said, king of the universe, and initiated a conversation? Is this the first time that I've actually thought about it? I waited all the way to Rosh Hashanah to acknowledge God as king, and I fainted. So basically what he was trying to say was, yeah, sometimes we only start talking to God when it comes to Rosh Hashanah. And I guess the message is that we can always, begin a conversation and talk and pour our heart out, or whatever it is that we want to discuss, to create a communication with our Creator. It's a beautiful way of living life. And again, that will take different shapes for different people, and that's totally fine. It's a very unique experience. But I just wanted to mention that because it talks about Hamelech. So that is kind of a trip through the mahzor, highlighting the ones that we can focus on if we're not going to do all of them. But for me, the main thing is just to find meaning. It's not about saying words. It's about having a meaningful experience. And to highlight those three aspects of teshuvah, thinking about ourselves, where we are in life. What was the other one? Tefillah, praying, discussing with God, as we spoke about in length, and tzedakah, how we are in our relationship to others, which kind of sums up life. So there you have it, friends. You're welcome to unmute. And I thank you very, very much for joining. I'm going to stop the recording.